Hello, and welcome to Public Affairs Now, our super local look at what's going on in the Maryland General Assembly and the Arundel County Council. I'm Kelsey Keneally. In this episode, we will focus on the council as they debate a hot issue, how to best clean up our waterways. Today we have Councilman Chris Trumbauer and Michael Peruka. First up is Councilman Trumbauer. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here, Kelsey.
Let's start with what got us here. Could you explain why the stormwater fee was originally implemented?
Sure. So our specific bill that we passed in 2012 was a response to state legislation that was passed in the General Assembly. And that required the 10 largest counties, including Baltimore City and Maryland, to establish and enact a local stormwater program. But the reasoning behind all this goes back much further than 2012. As a large county, we have a federal stormwater permit. And this is a requirement of the 1972 Clean Water Act. So we have this federal permit obligation that says, Anne Arundel County, you have to reduce the pollution that's coming from stormwater runoff. And stormwater runoff, you can think about it as anytime it rains or precipitates, water will flow off your rooftop, your driveway, sidewalks, roads, any hard surfaces where it can't soak in. The issue is, as that water is flowing, it picks up other contaminants and pollutants. It carries those into storm drains or ditches or straight into the creeks or streams, and then that will cause problems not only for the water body and the ecosystem, but also it can cause flooding and erosion and things like that. So recognizing that, what the state legislation did is said, you counties, you haven't really been doing what you need to do on the stormwater runoff problem, so we're going to give you a little nudge and say, now it's state law, you have to create these programs. So after that state law was passed, the county executive at the time and myself and Councilman Dick Ladd got together to form a work group with a bunch of stakeholders and others and the Department of Public Works here in the county. And we met for about probably 4 or 5 months and came up with a framework of what our program should look like. Shortly after that, the county executive introduced a stormwater bill that set up that program, and that's what we have in place today.
And why did you vote in favor of the legislation?
So I've always been a fan of tackling hard problems and not running away from them. My constituents in the greater Annapolis area, the environment is a big issue for them. We have lots of waterfront areas, we have lots of creeks and streams, and it's part of our quality of life. So I actually ran on an environmental platform back in 2010, and it's something that I was very deliberate in talking to people about. We've got to reduce our polluted runoff, and we've got to put projects in the ground that will help with that. And so I was always very interested in tackling this problem, and I actually introduced a bill prior to 2012 to set up a more modest stormwater program just based on my knowledge of the need. And that bill didn't ultimately get a vote. I withdrew it when it was clear that the council at the time wanted to wait and see what the state did. Well, lo and behold, the state during that next General Assembly session came back and passed that 2012 law. And so I had already done some work up to that point, and it was a natural progression to convene that stakeholder group with representation from the council, the county exec, and all the other folks, and we put that in place. So when that went forward, I was the kind of chief champion of that, along with Councilman Ladd at the time, and Councilman Grasso, who is on the council with me now, was also a leading proponent. We're still operating basically on that measure that passed back then.
Now, let's bring in Councilman Peruka. Thank you for joining us.
It's a great privilege to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Councilman, could you please explain what the council will be doing on Monday, April 6th?
Well, sure. On Monday, April 6th, we will have public hearings and probably, unless there's amendments, a vote on the matters that are before the council that evening. And they include 2 bills that have to do with stormwater management, or what some people call the rain tax. And there'll be, as I say, public hearings, so the public will get a chance to weigh in. And then the councilman will vote on these 2 bills, one of which would be more or less a cold turkey immediate removal of the rain tax, and the other one would be a phase out of it over 4 years.
And why do you support an outright repeal?
Well, I support an outright repeal of the bill, but I also support phasing it out if in fact we can't get the outright repeal of the bill. And I support them both for really for the same reasons. And it's on a number of levels. that I object to the rain tax or the stormwater management program as it's designed. Those levels would include the fact that I believe that there's an illegality or a lack of legality involved in the program initially. Also that I believe it's illogical, and also I believe it's unaffordable. So it's illegal, illogical, and unaffordable. And if I could tick through those, there's a large body of argument, legal argument, that says that the federal government doesn't even have any authority under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution to involve itself in environmental matters at all. Now, I know they do. We all know they do. But it's important, I think, to make that statement and make the statement that when they act outside their authority, they should not be gone along with. They should be resisted. In fact, there is a federal court decision in our federal district that says that stormwater is not a pollutant, and so that the EPA has no authority to regulate it. So that's on the illegal side or unconstitutional side. I would have those arguments. Indeed, if we're going to, the illogical part comes in, because if we're going to regulate pollutants or try to get rid of pollutants, it doesn't make sense to regulate stormwater. Stormwater, again, as the federal court said, is not a pollutant. There's a whole list of EPA pollutants. I don't have the list with me, but there's a lengthy list of the kinds of things that they consider to be pollutants, but stormwater is not one of them. And so, again, the federal court has said that there's no authority for the EPA to regulate it. So this kind of mandate we keep hearing about, that there's this mandate that we must do thus and such by 2025, that mandate has been ruled unconstitutional by a federal court and, in fact, should be considered null and void. There is no mandate as such, or no enforceable mandate in that sense. And then thirdly, I just believe that it's unaffordable. We are acting as if these programs are so important. They're so important that we must do them. And they're so important that we must have our own individual funding source for this particular line of programs. Well, I would venture to say that every department of county government would like to have its own funding and not compete with other projects or other programs. The police would like that, the fire would like that, everybody. Rex and Park would like that, I think. But in this case, we've taken this environmental question and made it so extreme, so important that it can't compete. And my argument would be that when you go and take it out of the pocket of my constituents, it's competing in that pocket. When it comes out of that pocket, it has a competitive, it puts him in a competitive disadvantage for other things that he might want to buy or might want to have. It might, you know, this is a $1 billion program that you're asking the taxpayers to pay for over the next 10 years. And our council chairman actually called it the biggest, largest tax increase in county government charter history. And that's what we're looking at here. So there's an unaffordability aspect of it too. And that's aside and apart from whether or not we might believe it's important. There are a lot of things that are important, and there will be people, I'm sure, on Monday evening that make the case that it's important. And that case, I think I would cede that point. It's important. But whether or not, if it's so important though, we're going to have to make the decision, is it more important than a new library? Is it more important than the next school building that we're scheduled to build? So it's got to fit in there competitively. And this idea that, well, it's so important it can't compete, I respectfully disagree with that idea.
Councilman Trumbauer, as a former riverkeeper, what can you tell us about the projects that have been completed so far and whether they work? Can you explain how they help the Bay?
Sure, and so to fully understand this, you have to get back to the federal permit that requires us to reduce pollution. And there's a number of different ways to do that. The county has always had some level of stormwater controls, whether that's just storm drains that carried the water away as fast as possible, or sediment ponds, or some of these other things folks are familiar with. So, but more recently, the county went into a philosophy that we're going to do more green projects, more environmental projects like stream restorations and rain gardens, or things called bioswales, which really capture the rainwater and the runoff and soak it in the ground. You know, back before I was on the council, I did work in the environmental field, and then for a few years when I was on the council in my first term, and I'm very familiar with those types of projects. And what they allow you to do is to slow water down, to soak it into the ground, and that helps manage all the pollution that the water is carrying with it. So if you've just got the water going from the hard surfaces, carrying the pollution right into a storm drain, that's going to kick it straight out into the local water body. You get no management, you get no treatment of that. If the county comes in and puts a stormwater project in place, it's going to be much more attached to that local environment where it feeds into the stream slowly, allows it to go over some different management type things and soak into the ground, allow the biological processes to come into play. And that's where you're going to actually see a reduction in the amount of pollution from where the pollution comes in to where it ultimately enters our waterways. So I do have some familiarity with that. The projects do work, and I think as our program continues to progress, we're going to see more projects going in the ground in our communities all across the county, and more folks will be familiar with what they look like and what they do.
Tell us about the financial commitment to do this. How much does it cost?
Sure. And again, the federal permit requires us to reduce pollution. It doesn't itself come with a price tag, but part of the work the county does is estimate how much it would cost to comply. And that, when we formed our framework for the current legislation in 2012, the estimate that our Department of Public Works gave us for our 5-year stormwater permit was in the neighborhood of, I think, $340, $350 million. That's capital projects in the ground all across the county. That's pretty much in line with similar counties across the state that are similar in size to us that have the same obligations. But what we decided to do was design a program that would allow us to achieve that. We didn't want to pick an arbitrary number because the point of the stormwater legislation isn't just to raise money. I mean, it's to actually reduce pollution. The money is the vehicle that allows us to put the projects in the ground. And so the ultimate price tag, what the guidance we were going on from DPW was somewhere around $340 million. We broke that down into how much we would have to raise through the stormwater fee, how much could then be financed with bonds, and how many projects that would support. And the Department of Public Works has an excellent program. Not only have they identified where they want all the projects to be, but they've mapped them. Citizens can go onto the Department of Public Works website. They can see where the projects are. They can see the areas of high interest because there's a lot of pollution. They can see the timeline of when in the next 6 years the county is planning to do projects in different areas. And they've even attached to each project an estimated reduction of pollution that is associated with that project. And folks can get all of this information and a lot more right from our Department of Public Works website on aacounty.org.
That's a big price tag. Councilman Peruka, is it possible to achieve the same goals without this fee?
Well, I kind of think that question comes from the wrong direction, if you will, respectfully, because I don't think it's a matter of, well, we can't do these if we don't have, we must have this separate fund. As I said earlier, I think that everything has to be judged and prioritized with respect to its affordability versus its importance. And it would be nice if every program had its own separate funding and didn't have to compete. But again, the taxpayer is the ultimate payer of this bill, and this scheme of the rain tax, the whole rain tax scheme, is one that reaches again into my constituents' pockets and says, and in a sense says, we at the county level are so incompetent that we can't prioritize this. So we're going to have to tax you again for it. We're going to take it out of your pocket again.
Of course, Anne Arundel County is not alone. Other counties are also considering changes to this fee. What has happened that has caused a review?
Well, I'm not going to have a very long answer to that because, in fact, I really don't understand what's happening at the state level. It's enough for me to try to worry about the county level. There have been some attempts to repeal the rain tax at the state level. I think one is still in the legislature and one is still alive to do that. I'm not an expert on those bills, but my particular job, and I see my function, is to be a steward of the taxpayers' money at the county level. And whatever the state may or may not do, they might do something that we would go along with. They might do something that we would be bound to try to resist. Again, we are stewards, and I consider myself a steward of my constituents' pocketbooks and wallets. And that's why, again, with respect to your previous question, I think it comes from the wrong direction. We always have to start with what we can afford, because a case can always be made that something is so important. But we have unlimited needs and limited resources, and and I'm getting ready to go through my first budget cycle here as a county councilman. I'm a rookie at this, but it seems to me my job is going to be to make those priorities.
Councilman Trumbauer, a lot of people in the environmental community do not like the moniker rain tax. Do you think that is a fair name?
Well, it's not fair, but it's brilliant marketing. I mean, the folks that don't like the stormwater program, they can call it rain tax, and it sounds preposterous. And it would be preposterous public policy to tax the rain. I mean, I'm the first one that'll admit that. The challenge is that this stormwater fee or tax, whatever you want to call it, is widely misunderstood. And that's a problem of local governments and probably also the environmental community who supported this not getting their message out very well. And the opposing side, the folks that don't like this, got their message out extremely well. But the reality is that this is not a Maryland-only thing. There's 10 counties that are required to have stormwater programs, but there's many more other areas throughout the state that have adopted them on their own because it's the best model to actually meet your stormwater and your pollution obligations. There's something like 140 communities in Texas that pay stormwater fees. So if you think about it, there's more people in Texas paying stormwater fee or the rain tax than there is in Maryland, but you don't hear that part. A recent poll that I had a look at showed that 50% of the people that were surveyed actually thought they were being taxed when it rains. And why shouldn't they if they're hearing about the rain tax? And so I think it is widely misunderstood. The more you inform people about it, generally the more favorable they view it, because I think everybody wants to reduce pollution. Everybody cares about their local waterways. And you really get into, well, how are we going to pay for it? Is it going to be this separate fee? Is it going to come out of our general taxes? You know, that's where the real rubber hits the road.
What about you, Councilman Peruka? Is calling this the rain tax fair?
Well, first of all, I didn't give it the name. I have used the name, but I guess I would say to those who the proponents of the legislation, the rain tax, if you don't want to have something called the rain tax, then don't tax the rain. It's just that simple. If you want to address certain pollutants, then maybe it should have a moniker that is appropriate. But to tax the rain seems like a silly thing. It seems like a silly name, but in fact, that's what's happening. They're taxing the stormwater evaporation cycle, and they're kind of inventing a formula to do that and saying that relates to pollutants that are in the stream. But by the same token, there's nitrogen, which is one of the pollutants. There's nitrogen in the air. A lot of the nitrogen that ends up in the streams is atmospheric. So are they going to tax the air? Are we going to figure out some formula to tax the air that blows across your yard? I mean, that sounds crazy. But so did taxing the rain. That sounded crazy.
So how can people testify on this legislation, Councilman Trumbauer?
So there's a hearing on 2 stormwater bills. One would repeal the program entirely, one would phase it out. That is on Monday, April 6th at 7 o'clock. We expect a pretty healthy turnout for that. So folks can come and comment on Monday night, April 6th, when the public hearing is. They can also submit written testimony to the council, and you can call the council to figure out the best way to do that. It's 410-222-1401, and you can submit written testimony to the council. They can distribute it to all the council members, or you can look up your own council member and give them a personal phone call or an email to their office address. But there's lots of ways to interact with us before a vote will be taken on this.
That's all the time we have for this episode. Thank you to our guests, Councilman Trumbauer and Councilman Peruka. They are both on Facebook, so please check out their pages. You can reach the County Council by calling 410-222-1401. We'll see you next time.